Start.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee. Happy Thursday. So we're going to start we are going to go into executive session shortly, but first, Ellen, if you could take the roll call, please.
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. Trustee Cates.
Here.
I know Trustee Kane and Trustee Ames is not able to join us. Trustee Flood.
Here.
Trustee McMahon.
Here.
Trustee Misher.
Present.
Trustee Riley.
Here.
That's committee members, and I know we have Trustee Alexander joining us as well. So we're all set to start.
Thank you. We're joined by a very large and distinguished group of others, and hopefully have good participation today in all of these agenda items. But the first thing we're going to do is, could I have a motion for the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee of the Board of Trustees to go into executive session under the provision of 1 MRSA Section 4056C to discuss the condition, acquisition, or disposition of real property or economic development if premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive or bargaining position of the University of Maine system.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Trustee Mishu and seconded by Trustee Flood. Ellen, could you take the roll?
Trustee Cates.
Yes.
Trustee Flood.
Yes.
Trustee McMahon.
Yes.
Trustee Mishu.
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. So we'll be going into executive session. It's expected will be about 30 minutes, and then we'll be coming back. Thank you for your patience. Ellen, are we all back as far as you can tell?
You're all set.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for your patience. We went a little longer than we'd hoped to, so thanks for hanging in there. We've got a busy agenda today. We're going to talk about adjustments for the 23 budget for the remaining 2 campuses we haven't talked about. We're going to hear a really encouraging update on the governor's proposed budget. We're going to discuss an endowed chair at the University of Southern Maine. We're going to talk about some bridge financing, some renovation of space at 2 campuses, and then we'll have a number of regular reports. So we've got a busy agenda. I would ask everybody to leave yourself on mute unless you're speaking. Also, I can't see everybody at the same time. So if I don't recognize somebody when you raise your hand, if you could just go ahead and speak up, because I might not see you otherwise, okay? So thank you. So we'll begin the public session, and the first agenda item is the FY23 budget revisions. Again, this is continuing the discussion we had at our last meeting and our last board meeting with respect to a number of the campuses, and this is the remaining 2. So we'll turn this over to Ryan Lowe.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, as you noted, we're back for our what we hope will be our last round of FY23 budget changes. A reminder that UMA, Presque Isle, Fort Kent, and USM presented proposals to you that were accepted in October. Happy to say that those budgets and those revisions are still on track. No need for additional revisions or no additional enrollment losses that have us concerned so far. So always good to report that those are on track. You're going to hear this morning from first Farmington and then Orono. You'll hear those presentations. After that, as we did in October, I'll wrap this up by kind of walking you through the budget detail and how the proposals that you hear about impact the bottom line, and then we'll be happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Thanks.
So I think with that, we would start with Farmington.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Joe, we can't hear you.
I still don't think we're hearing him.
No,
Yeah.
I'm assuming he's going to run down to my office. Give me 2 minutes.
Mr. Chair, do you want to flip the order and we could
Sure.
start with Orono and then we'll come back to Farmington?
Why don't we do that? That's great. Laurie, why don't you just stand by if you could?
Will do.
Thanks. So who is going to present for Orono?
I'll begin if it's okay.
It is.
Trustee
Morning.
Casey. And now we have our slideshow. So I'm joined by Kelly Sparks, our Vice President for Finance and our Chief Business Officer, and appreciate the chance to speak with you about a mid-year revision. We have basically 3 topics that we'll cover quickly with you today. First of all, a bit of a reminder. Next slide, please, Kelly. A bit of a reminder of what was approved in fiscal 23, because that's the foundation for the changes that are necessary for us now mid-fiscal year. Discussion of our shortfall and a revised request for university use of university resources, but also a description of our plan for addressing our shortfall. So next slide, Kelly.
By the way, if I just interrupt for a second, I think this begins on page 9 of our handouts,
Okay.
for those of you looking along at home.
Okay, pausing briefly for folks to locate it. And I just want to begin by continuing with an optimistic view that the University of Maine has not ever been more adequately positioned really for strategic growth that will benefit Maine and its people. And I want to emphasize our commitment to being strategic. We realize that that entails making choices, prioritizing, and finding ways to be efficient, and at the same time, not to lose track of the incredible strength that is here and that can grow. So we do take very seriously our fiscal challenges and the need for bold solutions. Next slide. Kelly will take us through the details of this slide, but I wanted to say that this is the budget presented to you toward the end of last fiscal year for your approval with a financial need that was $22 million and net of the increase in appropriation. And so Kelly will just remind what was approved at that time. I also would like to make the point that at that time, we had the wonderful Joanne Yastrzemski as our Vice President for Finance and Administration. Kelly arrived officially in October, started to work with these materials before that. So it's just amazing what Kelly has been able to do and learn and help us with in the past few months. So Kelly.
Thank you, President Farini-Mundy. Well, it's a pleasure to be here for my first FFT meeting and to be able to share these numbers with you today. So at the time on May 23rd, the budget that was approved was based on some incremental contractual salary increases that were estimated into the budget, expanded research investment to support the R1 research strategy for the institution, positions to fund growth across the organization in a number of different areas, inflationary costs that were estimated at that time, a gap from the FY22, so unbudgeted staff increases that were budgeted then into or planned into the budget, and some moderate capital expenditures. So that total gap at the time was $22 million. So I'm having a delay here as I move my slide forward. There we go. So our proposal at the time to shore up that gap was made up of both budget efficiencies, so operating expense and personnel efficiencies, as well as some additional revenue enhancements that were planned, and a planned use of unrestricted university reserves in the amount of $11.8 million. That was the plan for the $22 million at the time. The total gap, again, between the operating revenues was 11.7 million use of university reserves. So the operating reserves were 382 million. That was net of the tuition of the student aid that's pulled over into the expense category, or $394.6 million. This was all predicated on the fact that we have healthy reserves at the University of Maine, both E&G dedicated reserves as well as designated reserves. So a total coming into the year of 86.5 million. I'm going to turn it back over to President Farini-Mundy to talk a little bit about what has happened since that initial budget was presented on May 23rd.
So this at a glance gives you a sense of the stability of our enrollment over the last decade. And the fact that we had that stability, we had been able to buck the national trend of declining enrollment. We were not predicting the drop in enrollment that the University of Maine experienced this year. And so that was not factored into our budgeting. And you see it here, fall of 22, we were down significantly from our projections and from certainly what we had been looking at over the previous decade. So next slide, please. A little more detail on this. You can see where the drop is. It's both in incoming first-year students, big percentage there, and then overall some in retention. Our numbers of transfer and non-degree seeking students remained flat relatively for 2022. So next slide. Here, oops, wait a minute. Okay, you see a bit more detail here. Retention of undergraduates from the prior year and the incoming first year. These are the Machias numbers, right? Okay, Machias numbers, and so we also see drops there aligned essentially with what we saw at the University of Maine. Next slide, please. I want to go back, sorry, don't go back, but I wanted to point out on the previous slide that the transfer numbers at Machias were very encouraging for 2022. And the whole Machias story is a much longer one, and we can give you more detail about that at some point. Now looking at graduate students by category, retention, as is typical with graduate students, remains very strong. Incoming numbers down just a bit in first year and flat in non-degree students and readmits. So our graduate programs are very important, of course, to our R1 status, and we are relatively flat with these numbers, and that's ahead overall. Next one, please. As you might expect, we have had a very intensive focus on enrollment for the fall of 2023 with a new member of our team, the Vice President for Enrollment Management from the Registry, Norm Jones. Here are a few of the strategies that are being used in enrollment management right now. Much deeper use of digital recruitment and data-based examination of our processes, faster acceptance time, financial aid communication going out early, and a lot of very intensive work about admissions counselors in key territories. We understand how critical this enrollment situation is for us. And Kelly will go on now with the next slide to explain where we are here at mid-year.
Thank you. So this mid-year, or this reduction in our overall enrollment versus what the base budgeted plan was, results in a $15 million budget shortfall. That's about 3.8%, just to keep it in context of our overall operating expenses. This includes the Machias shortfall of $400,000. This includes the in-state tuition revenue of $1.9 million. And as you can see, the biggest concern here is our out-of-state or NEBHE tuition revenue shortfall of $12.6 million. Associated with that is the tech fee. So based on the student credit hours students are taking, they pay a tech fee. There is a $100,000 shortfall associated with that as well. Additionally, in the auxiliaries, a reduction in student enrollment also resulted in a reduction in student occupancy in our housing program and fewer than anticipated meal plans, as well as conference revenues, as kind of a different story associated with that. We had very aggressively tried to increase our conference revenue. And so this is not a reduction versus prior year. It's a reduction in versus what the original base budget was. So bringing that back into line with really what's achievable for this year. That totaled a $2.1 million anticipated shortfall for our auxiliaries. What I'd like to turn to now is really, what are we doing about it? I think that's a really important part of our story. So over the last 4 months, as we have calculated this shortfall, we have been diving into every opportunity that we can achieve on a mid-year basis. I'm going to call out here what is what will be an ongoing opportunity for us in terms of savings or revenue enhancement, and I'll call out what is a one-time savings and how we might approach that for future years. So operating efficiencies, we have looked at every open position and evaluated whether there is a need to continue with hiring or whether we can hold that position and evaluate it through the FY24 budgeting cycle. That includes faculty retirements, that includes all open staff positions across the organization. We have also looked at services and supplies. I like to jokingly say we're counting staples here. We're really evaluating what we're spending on, our contracts, our leases, our opportunities, our needs to spend money this year. As you all know, the story here is inflationary cost increases. So to achieve these savings mid-year has really been an all university effort to help us identify those opportunities. There is a one-time energy savings. I do want to call this out. It's a little over $1 million. It's very much of a one-time savings. This is something that we're very focused on going into the future years with increasing fuel costs. It's something that we need to pay attention to, and we need to think about energy efficiency opportunities on campus in order to maintain this over the next year. I don't anticipate that savings to be a part of our FY25 budget, just in a full transparency, but we'll come back and we'll talk more about that. It also includes some library subscription savings. There's lots of little things that roll up into that 4.1 million. We've also taken a look very closely at our scholarships and looked to see where we can exchange those scholarships where we may have foundation or other opportunities that are not leveraging E&G funds. That will be ongoing. So this is a primary focus of us, and we'll be looking at financially going forward as well and how we do and manage that process. Indirect cost returns. This is the great work of our research office and our research faculty who have been increasing their research productivity. There is an associated overhead rate associated with all research grants. We have exceeded expectations with those revenues this year. We anticipate, based on early grant productivity, that this will be an ongoing opportunity for increased revenue institutionally. And then in terms of strategic use of designated funds, this is MEIF, it's MAPIS, it's also other project-related funds, dollars we had set aside in prior years into a project-based budget that we can leverage potentially differently than we anticipated. So rather than thinking about new or additive, thinking of it as an offset. So we've identified $2.3 million in this category. After all of that is said and done, our request is to use an incremental amount of $4.3 million of unrestricted university reserves. The story is very similar for the auxiliaries. So based on our $2.1 million in incremental financial need, we've identified $600,000 in ongoing position vacancies that we will not fill in that area. We've reduced some of our services and supplies. This is primarily in food costs, so inflationary costs plus buying less because we have fewer food plans required to service, and then leveraging our auxiliary reserves. I'd like to call out here that we're right in the mid process to transitioning over to Sodexo. So I do anticipate our budget looking quite different for auxiliaries going into next year, and we're working through that right now. Based on this, this is a very early estimate. If I were to project where we're going to end the year in terms of our reserves, it will bring down our designated reserves, both the auxiliary and some of the designated funds, to 67.4, and our unrestricted reserves to 16.6 million. I'll go ahead and pause there, and I'm happy to stop sharing my screen or go back to open it up for questions that you may have of us.
And as we go to that, I would just like to chime in and to thank Kelly and her team for an extraordinarily careful scrutiny of all that we do in a very short period of time, and very good planning as we go into the work of fiscal 24 in a way that enables us to continue with our strategic directions and to continue to support the excellence that we have here across the university.
Do the Farmington presentation and then do them at once, whatever your preference is.
Why don't we do Farmington first, and then we'll open it up.
Yep.
So good morning, and I apologize for the technical problems, but our presentation will be fairly simple. We can go to the next slide, please. So you can see in the fall that we exceeded our projections, and that the problems, though, were in out-of-state and NEBI, where we were below projections, and it was very good in in-state and graduate and early college. So the net was better than expected. However, the out-of-state and NEBI have higher tuition, and therefore we found ourselves with an $800,000 deficit. And so what we had to do was to reduce our budget, which we have done successfully. We have taken out those $800,000. So as we look at the spring, we have revised the budget, and we are hoping that we will achieve those numbers. We can just move through to the next if you want to see the detail. Let's just move to auxiliary, because this is where we have a greater challenge. We had a $1.2 million deficit here as a result of some of the students that we did not get, particularly in out of state and NEBI. And those, by the way, I will say, were primarily, we attribute that to COVID, where we were not able to get into the high school. So we're hoping that for next year, this was a one-time problem. So we are in the process of reducing this budget. We're about halfway there, and we still have work to do. So we have about 655,000 that we are still looking to reduce. Certainly, any kind of vacant positions, we're taking out. We're also entering into an MOU with Franklin Memorial Hospital so that we're exploring areas of workforce housing for the vacancies that we have in our housing, and we are moving to a different relationship with our Sodexo contract, and that I think will help us. So we'll be better next year, we hope, but this year we still have work to do. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
You're still on mute. Oh, there you
Oh,
go.
I'm sorry. Hold on one second.
You're off mute now, Rob.
Am I okay now?
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. Why don't we start with the last presentation of Farmington in terms of questions from the board? And again, if I don't recognize you, just speak up because not everybody's on at the same screen.
Mr. Chair, while people are thinking of that, I've got about 2 minutes on just showing the committee where those numbers and how they get you to the right spot. Would you like me to do
Sure.
that?
Why don't you do that?
And then our part will be done. So let me just quickly bring up the details. And you do have these as part of your materials. So again, you can see here, this is Orono, E&G. So again, if you're just looking to tie all of these out, wanted you to be able to see that. So you see up here on E&G, the $15 million number that Kelly referenced at the top of the page. Here is some of the indirect cost recovery that is offsetting that. So you can see a total revenue loss of about 10.7 million. Kelly talked about several different initiatives here. I'll just again highlight a couple of the big ones. Again, you can see the one-time fuel and electricity savings. Number of those initiatives fall into the supplies and services category, and so you'll see theirs there as well. So ultimately, you roll all of these up, and you end up with reduced operating expenses of about 6.3 million. Those two net out to thankful for the glasses that I have on, 3.8 million. There's a modest increase here in debt service associated with the energy project at UMaine that the committee and the board has approved quite a while ago, but we start to see the debt service show up here. So that's the $4.3 million number that Kelly referenced on the E&G side. Over here, you see auxiliary and the combined numbers. So again, we'll just quickly point out fewer students always means or typically means less dining and residence hall revenue. You see that here at the top of the page, about $2 million in total, partially offset. There's some ins and outs here going on with transfers, but you see a personnel reduction. So the attrition and the vacancy savings that Kelly referenced get you down to roughly that $1.4 million number, which is closed through the reserve transfer. The E&G and auxiliary combination, again, it's just a combination of the two numbers, but you see the total down here at the bottom, the $5.7 million number. If you've got your A sheet handy and you go to the operating budgets and you scroll all the way over to the right on the Orono line, you'll see that $5.7 million number kind of tying out to everything else. So that's where that's how the math works on that. Same thing with Farmington. So again, the reduction in enrollment you see up here. Here's the roughly $800,000 that President McDonald and Joe and Lori mentioned, offset by some personnel reductions, some supplies and service reductions, get you back down to a balanced budget on the E&G side. On the auxiliary side, let me just move some faces here. Again, the reduction in enrollment means loss of revenue on the residence hall and the dining side. You see the roughly 1.2 million here, partially offset by some reduced Sodexo expenses, so fewer students, fewer meals, and so on. So you see that partially offset, but does leave a remaining balance of about 655,000, and you see that number again, the combined number. So again, if you're following at home, that's how all of the math ties out to the PowerPoints. And now happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Ryan. And those charts, which we can't really read on our screens, but I think they start at page 27 in the materials for today, so people can see them there. Questions for, why don't we start with Farmington first, since that's most recent in our memory here. Questions for President Edmondson? Excuse me, for not President Edmondson, excuse me. Questions? President, could you talk about, I understand the auxiliary budget's a work in progress to get to balance, but on the E&G, I'm looking for the page in our materials. If you could just walk us through how you got there.
With great difficulty, in terms of how we can cut the budget, but any position that was not filled, we tried not to fill it. If it was filled later in the year, we were then able to take that savings. And so it really comes down to people mostly. Some of that will present a problem for next year, I have to say, because if a position was not filled until half the year, next year we'll have the full person in it, but we will deal with that as it comes. There may be other positions that we lose that we're able to not fill. So we're really in an austerity mode here to work as hard as we can to maintain a balanced budget with a enrollment that has been a challenge.
Thank you, President. Other questions about the Farmington budget? Yes, Trustee Michaud.
Yeah. The one question I have actually follow up on your comment. Do you know what the structural gap is, what it will be when you get into the next budget cycle?
In terms of what we're anticipating next year?
Yes.
Well, I would say next year is going to be a challenge because we were given a 1.6 million financial stability payment this year. And if that goes away, that's a hole that we have. The 800,000 that we made up this year in E&G will be another challenge to meet that. And then auxiliary remains a challenge because we have two housing facilities that are scheduled to go offline to be repaired. These are our oldest facilities and they need to be repaired. So we have challenges next year. We're hoping that the enrollment holds or increases so that we can offset that.
Thank you. Other questions for President McDonald? Not seeing any. Let's go back then to University of Maine at Arno. Questions?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I was muting and unmuting myself.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. I did have a question. With regard to Farmington,
Yes.
knowing the potential situation forthcoming, is there a plan underway to increase enrollment, to adopt a more aggressive marketing and enrollment oriented, upping the revenue side of your budget in the budget?
Absolutely. That has been the work of this year. This is the first year in which we are post-COVID, so we have people out more aggressively into the high schools and trying to bring students in. We have a plan to increase yield. Our faculty are going to be fully engaged in bringing students in. We're revamping our honors program with 2 faculty members who are going to be very aggressive in terms of yield, trying to bring students in. We're launching an adult program that will be online, and that will help us. We have several new graduate programs, or at least certificates that we're working through, and graduate has been very successful. So we're going on all cylinders to try to bring as many new students in as we can. We're also aggressively working on retention and seeing if we can retain as many students as possible. So enrollment is our issue, and we're focused on it fully.
And just a comment, if I could, Chair,
Yes.
on that. I think it is very important for the board to seek a system-wide attempt to increase enrollment at some of these smaller campuses. Well, at all the campuses, but particularly when you have one like Farmington that is experiencing significant budget defects that they cannot clearly resolve, frankly, on their own without significant cuts in services, which may in fact have to occur. I don't put that out of the realm of possibility, but my point is this is not just Farmington's marketing problem. It is a system marketing problem, and I hope we can talk about that for the next fiscal year at a later point. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee. Thanks, President McConnell. Other questions for him? The folks at Farmington?
Could I just
Please, Chancellor, go ahead.
answer the trustees' comments? The system has moved into marketing, which it did not historically play a role in. It was historically left to the campuses exclusively. This past spring and summer, we were active online with millions of contacts with students. And in approximately 1 or 2 weeks, we will begin. Oh, there's my dog. I apologize. 1 or 2 weeks, we will begin a elongated campaign to communicate above and beyond the communications of each of the universities with respect to students that they have already accepted. So we are playing that role. The system has put about $400,000 towards that campaign. Again, that's an expense that the system has not previously shared in. And the addition of Tori to our staff, I think, is also going to help. So we have made historic changes with respect to marketing. Not surprisingly, that's been a little bumpy in as much as each of the universities have wanted to play a very active role in designing that. So this is the first year of such a large investment that we're making. It has been delayed somewhat, but we will be up and running in the next week or so with that campaign. And that will probably generate tens of millions of contacts. And it's an all online, instantaneous, recognizing students who have applied to our universities, being knowledgeable of which universities they've actually applied to, and providing additional information. So that is a campaign that we are undertaking, and it is really all been developed in the last a year as we go forward. I think the system will play a larger role in determining the size of that investment going forward. And this is not intended to take pressure off any of the campuses to be communicating with their selected students. I think contacts by faculty, by department heads, by deans, by presidents are extremely effective as well. And I encourage and have encouraged all of our universities to be involved in that.
Thank you, Chancellor. Trustee McMahon.
Totally different subject for President McDonald. What effect has the 4 to 3 credit hour transition had on recruitment, and do we predict it having a beneficial effect this year, next year? There's been no mention of it.
So we are moving to the 3 credit system next year. We are still on the 4 credit system. So it remains to be seen how that, if it will have a benefit. I believe it will have a benefit. I think that it will make it easier for community college students to come here. And we are right now creating articulation agreements with the community colleges. And it certainly makes it easier for students to move across this system. So it puts us in a comparable position to other universities, but we will have to see the benefit next year when that is implemented, because we're still operating on 4 credits right now.
Thank you. Further questions for President McDonald? Seeing none, why don't we then move to University of Maine? And we heard there the presentation from President Freeney Monday and Vice President Sparks. Questions about the University of Maine 23 budget? So maybe there's a question for Ryan. Obviously, the numbers are larger because it's by far the largest institution. But are we talking about the same relative percentage problems here as other places, or not?
Yeah, great point. Actually, a little bit less in some cases, because as you noted, because the Orono budget is so large. I think Kelly can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the variance here is somewhere in the 3.5 to 4.5 kind of percent range. When we presented to you in October, we had some gaps that were in the double-digit percentages. So as a percentage of the budget, it's a small number. It's obviously a large number, and any dollar that reduction that we make is always challenging in this environment. But as a percentage of the budget, it's relatively small.
Other questions? President Freeney Monday, you mentioned unrestricted auxiliary reserves, I think, in your remarks, and that's kind of, maybe it's just to me, that sounds like a new thing I hadn't heard before. I know about unrestricted reserves, but I hadn't heard them broken down before. Is it different at University of Maine?
So there are a couple of things, and I may need to ask Kelly and or Ryan to help me, but in general, we have in the operating budget, we have unrestricted E&G reserves and unrestricted designated reserves.
Right.
And I'm not sure if your question was around that or particular to the auxiliary area, but
No.
it was the former.
Yeah, it was just,
Yeah,
I take it that's the unrestricted reserves, part of the unrestricted reserves.
right. Unrestricted but designated. So so it's a category of reserve that I understand is largely at UMaine in Orono. And a piece of it would be, I guess, best described as funds functioning as endowments. So donations that have come in, and Ryan can explain this, Ryan and Kelly both far better than I, but basically donations that have come that don't rise to the level of endowment spinning off. And so the ways in which we're able to use those dollars, we have to be very careful about how things are designated and what we're able to draw on for these sorts of general E&G type expenses, but there are other accounts in this category as well. Maybe a project that several years ago we put aside funds for and didn't wind up using them all. And so now we're evaluating in a rather elaborate process that Kelly could talk about at some length, evaluating each of these accounts to determine whether we have some resources that can help us as one-time funds or possibly as ongoing. Kelly, how did I do?
Yeah, that was a great description. Yeah, so there's in that category right now, if you think of that bar chart of our reserves, we have the $69.6 million chunk of our total reserve. So 86.5 million, 69.6 are in these designated reserves. About 15 million of them are in the funds that are functioning like endowments. So those have a very specific and restricted purpose, but they've also been somewhat underutilized in some cases. So for example, we have a faculty endowment in there that has not been used. So that's a way of us to thinking about how we use that, one, to attract and retain a top faculty member, but also as a potential partial offset to some of the expenses associated with that faculty member. There's another bucket, which is our auxiliary reserves. So about 13.9 million of those are in auxiliary reserves. Those we can draw on for future improvements, as well as a potential expense offset for our auxiliary units. We have designated projects, 16 million. These are projects we've said we're going to buy a big system. It's something that goes over a couple of fiscal years. We have a planned use for them, but we can take a step back given the current budget scenario and given the current enrollment, right? Our enrollment dropped this year. Will now carry through the next 4 years. So how can we really think about strategically reprioritizing some of those projects as we go into the next couple of years and potentially retargeting the use of those? And then cost sharing. That's a bucket that we potentially have it's 6.8 million. And that is matching funds that we put up against federal or state or other grants that we're going to leverage university dollars. So we set aside those dollars into a project budget to ensure that they're always there for use in those match. So we have to evaluate. Sometimes we think a grant is going to come through and it doesn't. So we set them aside and we have to go literally account by account and say, that grant didn't come, let's push those dollars back into use for other activities. So there's thousands and thousands of these accounts. It takes a lot of ongoing management to make sure that they are used very intentionally and strategically. And I think given the current context of fairly flat enrollment going into the next couple of years, we need to be potentially reprioritize and be intentional around how we use those.
Thank you. Vice President, how long have you been on board now?
I sort of started September 26th. I officially started in October. As I got on board, I saw some of these early budget concerns, and I started a little bit earlier just because I needed a little more time to ground myself in the numbers.
Well, thank you for your presentation and welcome to the FFT community. Other questions about the University of Maine 23 budget? I'm not seeing any. So if not, our task is to consider approving the presentations that were made about how these budget gaps are going to get closed. And I'm going to read a proposed motion, proposed resolution that the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded to the Board of Trustees approval at the January 29/30/2023 board meeting. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and approves the FY 2023 UMaine and UMF proposed operating budget revisions. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Bishu and seconded by Trustee Flood. Discussion on the motion? Other questions? Seeing none, Ellen, if you could call the roll.
Certainly. Trustee Cates,
Yes.
Trustee Flood,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Mishu,
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. So not on the agenda because it's hot off the press is news about the Governor Mills proposed budget as it affects the University of Maine system. And we've got a report. I think, Ryan, are you going to quarterback this, or the Chancellor, I think, is going to start off? Chancellor Malloy?
Yes, I would just brief the board and others who are participating in the call today that in the governor's budget, after a long consideration, hard work, and developing a plan to go to the governor with respect to the needs of the system, we were able to convince, and the governor agreed to start with by filling what was a hole in our budget. And that is that we did receive an adjustment in the second year of the biennium budget that we're currently in of 3%, but not built into our base. The governor has recommended rectifying that so that that 3% does go into our base, and has will send to the legislature, has sent to the legislature, that we receive additional support in this high inflation environment. And you've heard about some of that in the presentations you've had already. An additional adjustment of 4.5% per year on a compounded basis. So this is a break with the past, and we are appreciative of the governor's treatment. We did argue for more, but we are very grateful for the filling of the gap that we had and the generosity that the governor has expressed to our institutions. And quite frankly, the depth in which the governor has dug into our institutions, understands our institutions, and the need. And that's also reflected in an additional amount of money going into MEIF, which is a state-funded research pool. As you know and have heard in previous conversations, Maine is substantially behind most other states in support of state-funded research at its educational institutions. I think in celebration, in some senses, of our R1 status, and quite frankly, the great work that is taking place to support Maine's economy at our universities, this money was also awarded, and we appreciate that. And the Maine State Grant is also increased as well. That combined with the president's signature on December 23rd of the bill that lifts Pell Grants should bring a substantial relief to students in the state of Maine with respect to the cost of higher education. So I think thus far in the process, we are grateful, very grateful to the governor for what she has done. Obviously, we know that this will play itself out between now and April or now and June, and certainly cannot count chickens before they're hatched. But we do believe that this is a good start to the season, the finance season. I also want to point out that we are lucky to have a great team representing us. Ryan Lowe is really quite exceptional in his knowledge of the state budget as a whole, our own budgets, as he evidences at each of our meetings, and the team that he's put together to help guide this. I will also note that we did make I think a good presentation with respect to the effect of the inflationary environment and how that has impacted Maine families, perhaps represented to some extent in somewhat disappointing numbers at some of our universities this past year. And we believe that this will be the basis of going forward. And quite frankly, as reflected earlier, the system playing a larger role in marketing of our universities as well. Ryan, I turn it over to you. I'm sure I missed something, and feel free to correct me. But I do begin with a plea of saying how great you are.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I think you hit all of the highlights. The only thing I just reemphasize again is just incredibly how grateful we are, both that the governor took the time to listen to us, understand what our needs were, and then and put this request in. Just looking at it historically, if you take that base 3% and add in the 4.5%, it's a 7.5% increase. It's the largest increase to the system in, we can go back to 2000 and there's nothing even close to this in that window. The largest increase we'd had since then is 4.8%. So significant investment in the system and incredibly grateful for that.
Let me also add that I appreciated the governor giving an opportunity for us to make a in-person presentation. I want to thank Trustee Riley and President Farina Monday joining me in that presentation. Clearly, the governor understands the needs of higher education in the state and listened to us patiently, asked some tough questions. I think we were able to resolve many of those issues and answer those questions. And we look forward to working with our partner institutions, the community colleges and Maine Maritime, in trying to search out grouping efficiencies that we might all benefit from. So we appreciate the governor's advice on that point.
Thank you. Chair Riley, would you like to add something?
I would just add how very grateful I am for the time that the governor spent digging in, pushing back, asking us questions. President Farina Monday was particularly articulate across systems, talking about activities at UMPI and the Your Pace program, just a wide range of discussions. And I think we should be extremely grateful. This is definitely the public education governor, and she's done so much for community colleges and K through 12, and now she's made a similar investment in us. And I think it's just a great starting point for the legislative discussions.
Thank you. Just a couple of things that this is obviously all great news, but subject to a couple of caveats. One is that the governor proposes and the legislature disposes, and her budget still needs to go through the process. And as Trustee Flood knows better, or Trustee Michoud too, and Trustee Kane is not with us today, know better than anyone. You never know exactly how that process is going to go, but it's safe to say that if these kinds of increases were not in the governor's budget, they were unlikely to appear out of whole cloth any other way in the process. So this is great news. And the other thing, just as a word of caution going ahead, as we begin to think about the budget for the fiscal year 24, I think, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were assuming in your initial calculations for that budget that we would get treated well by the administration, and hopefully the legislature on our appropriation. Notwithstanding that, we're still going to have some significant financial issues going forward in crafting a 24 budget. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. We had made most of these assumptions when we went out to the campuses as far as guidance for building the 24 budget. So it's not helping us in that sense, but we're grateful, and it could have gone in the other direction for sure.
And I guess I would just add that it doesn't take the any pressure off our efforts to find efficiencies. So I think we're meeting the governor halfway. We'll look for efficiencies. She's investing in us, and together I think it's a positive future.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions about that before we move on? So we'll keep our eyes on the legislature going ahead. The next item on the agenda, which is at tab 2, is also an exciting announcement. It's the establishment of a new endowed professorship in public policy at the University of Southern Maine. And President Edmondson is, I believe, going to present that. Good morning, President.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. We are pleased to introduce an opportunity for a new endowed professorship at the University of Southern Maine's Muskie School. This new endowed professorship in public policy at the Muskie School of Public Service will help the university attract and retain a full professor with public policy expertise to mentor junior faculty, facilitate collaborative teaching in sustainability, and develop a research agenda focused on sustainability, energy, and climate transition with significance in Maine. I'm particularly pleased that this 7-figure gift adds to the matching funds for the Harold Alfond Foundation's historic investment in the University of Maine's Graduate and Professional Center. And I will now turn to Ainsley Wallace, the president and CEO of the USM Foundation, who will share some additional details about the gift.
Thank
Thank you, President Edmondson. Thank you, Trustee Cates, and good morning, committee. A new endowed professorship in public policy was established through the University of Southern Maine Foundation in October 2022 with a $1 million gift. This gift from a prominent organization honors the legacy and distinguished career of a deceased servant leader who's made a profound impact on the University of Southern Maine, the University of Maine system, and numerous organizations and Maine civic life. This leader dedicated himself to working on behalf of the Maine people, companies, and government, and our state and our communities are better for his work. The interdisciplinary nature of this professorship and its focus on sustainability align with the donor's commitment, the life of the honoree, and the interdisciplinary ethos of the Muskie School and the Maine Graduate and Professional Center. The professorship and its name will be formally announced after approval has been granted by the trustees.
Thank you, Ainsley. So as I understand it, our narrow role of this committee is to recommend to the board to approve or not the creation of the endowed chair. That's it. Is it, Ellen, am I stating that correctly?
That's correct, Trustee Cates.
Okay. So with respect to that narrow task, we have other questions of President Edmondson or Ainsley Wallace this morning. I'm not seeing any. And again, exciting news. I'm going to read a proposed motion that the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded for Board of Trustee approval at the January 29/30/2023 board meeting. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and approves the authorization of the University of Maine system acting through the University of Southern Maine to establish a new professorship in public policy with the naming details to be announced publicly at a later date. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Flood,
Second.
second by Trustee Mishu. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, Ellen?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
Trustee Flood,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Mishu,
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. Boy, Chair Riley, when she chaired this committee, was always right on time, and I realize we are a minute behind, and I apologize. We'll do better. So if we could move on to tab 3, this is bridge financing request for the Portland Development Project at the University of Southern Maine. And Ryan Lowe is going to present this issue for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is tab 3. It is related to bridge financing related to the construction of the Portland Residence Hall and parking garage. So let me just note up front that this item is specifically related to the financing of the project. The construction portion continues to move ahead on budget, on time. So this is not about cost overruns or anything along that specific to the project. I'll note Tracy Elliott. I see Tracy joining us today. In her role as controller in her office, they are literally juggling just scores of short-term and long-term financing projects across the system right now. Something, quite frankly, that several years ago we didn't need to worry about because we didn't often bring construction projects to you or deferred maintenance projects, and if they did, they were few and far between. So it's a good problem to have. And so when Tracy and her team looks at all of these variety of projects going on at one time with various financing needs, the goal is always to step back, look at all of the projects and the financing needs that we have, and try to do at least 3 things. We try to maximize the amount of cash flow when we're looking at financing all of these projects and the timing of it. We want to minimize the number of debt issuances we go out for. So every time we issue debt, you go through a really rigorous process, and you're paying bond counsel and you're paying all kinds of people, and it's not cheap. And then we also want to minimize interest costs that we're paying on construction projects. The dollars that we have, we want to maximize those, and so we're not interested in making payments on buildings that haven't started yet. So the proposal in front of you, in tab 3, achieves all of those goals by creatively using internal resources that would later be reimbursed when we go out for debt issuance. It allows us to maximize the amount of dollars that go into the project, and not spend them on issuance costs and unnecessary interest payments. That I think is the easiest way to explain what this is. It is specifically for $8 million. We'll fund this internally, and then again, when we go out and issue debt, we'll simply reimburse ourselves. So no negative impact. Everything here is positive, consistent with the original project, and consistent with our goal to be as efficient as we can when we finance these projects. So I think with that, let me quickly go to Tracy to see if she wants to clean up any messes I made along the way, and then if not, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ryan. No messes at all. That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Any questions? Seeing or hearing none, let me read the text of a proposed resolution. That the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded to the consent agenda for the Board of Trustee approval at the January 29/30/2023 board meeting. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and authorizes the issuance of bridge financing from the system to the University of Southern Maine for up to $8 million as determined by the treasurer for the purpose of funding construction expenses for the Portland Residence Hall, Portland Structured Parking Garage, and the Career and Student Success Center, to be reimbursed by the subsequent issue of debt or other funding sources as appropriate. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Mishu and seconded by
Second.
Trustee Flood. Is there discussion on the motion? If not, Ellen, if you could call the roll.
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Flood,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Mishu,
Yes.
trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. At the beginning of the meeting, I'm sorry, I forgot to recognize that our 3 faculty representatives to this committee, I think all of whom were with us this morning, Michael Scott, Clyde Mitchell, and William Otto. Again, they are members of this committee, and we're glad to have you with us. We also have a spot for a student member of this committee. Apparently, these kinds of accounting issues and financing issues are not as attractive as some other issues might be to students. But if any of you on the respective campuses know of anyone, we've got a vacant spot for a student to be a member, a non-voting member of this committee. So I'd love to hear from you. Moving on to tab 4 is concerned with the Deering Farmhouse renovation at the University of Southern Maine, and will be presented by President Edmondson.
Thank you, Trustee Cates. And before I turn to the Deering Farmhouse, I do want to let this group know that today is Alec Porcia's last day with the University of Southern Maine. He's going on to some new adventures, and I know that this committee is very familiar with his excellent work, and I want to thank him for the time that he's contributed to the university. Buster Neal, who is currently the interim CBO at the University of Maine Augusta, will be helping the University of Southern Maine as well. And so I want to thank Buster for his willingness to step into that role. And also I want to thank President Sakis for his willingness to collaborate with us as we work through this interim period to identify a new CBO. So again, thank you, Alec. And so the USM is seeking authorization to spend up to $2 million to move and restore the Deering Farmhouse. The restoration project is an important standalone project as it represents a key historic asset that has fallen into disrepair on one of USM's campuses. It is also a key aspect of CFA planning, although we do recognize that planning is underway and requires further board approval. But as the farmhouse sits in the planned CFA's proposed footprint and would house music school administrative space, it would require attention as well. So I will turn this over to Alec Porteous at this time to discuss the details of the proposed project.
Thank you very much, President Edmondson. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, President Edmondson, for your really kind words. I appreciate that greatly. And I've been before this committee a number of times over the past 4 years and have just really enjoyed working with you all. It's obviously a significant challenge to be a trustee for a university system that's so geographically diverse and has so much going on, and then layer on COVID and the things we've been through over the past several years. And I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed working with all of you, and as a Mainer, how grateful I am for everything that you do. So turning quickly to the Deering Farmhouse, just a little bit more background. The president laid it out nicely. We're asking for up to $2 million that we would spend to restore what is a historic asset on our campus. It's the last vestige of the Deering estate. And this building had been used for a variety of things over the years, but nothing over the past decade. It's really fallen into disrepair. If in the future the Board of Trustees approves the Center for the Arts, this project becomes an important enabling one for that, because right now it's sitting in what would be the northwesternmost part of that building site. So we would need to move it. We would like to move it anyway to put it on a new foundation and then restore it from there. If that project for some reason didn't go forward, this could function as a standalone as well, because it is a historic asset. Greater Portland Landmarks has landmarked it. It actually put it on its list of places in peril several years ago, which was an unfortunate distinction for the university to have that. So just as far as historic stewardship goes, similar to the Academy building that you all approved over the summer, I would put this one in that category as well, of a historic building that really has an important place in the city's history, in the state's history, and certainly our campus's history, that, as I said, has just fallen into disrepair. The $2 million would be funded over 3 years. We had $500,000 in our FY23 capital plan for the building. I think the plan going forward would probably be to split the remaining $1.5 million in FY24 and FY25, and the construction cycle would work that way. I wanted to turn it over to Mike Hudson very quickly here. Mike is our Associate Vice President of Operations. He joined the university about a year ago after a long and distinguished career in the Coast Guard. I can't tell you how lucky I feel that he joined us. I don't think he's ever presented to the committee before, but he's instrumental in just about all of our projects. He's worked really hard on this one. And I just wanted him to show you all a couple renderings of the building, what it looks like now, what we have in mind, and then, of course, very happy to take any questions. So, Mike, please go ahead, and I apologize for taking up a little too much time.
Thank you, Alec. I'm going to share my screen here with those slides. Okay, hopefully everyone sees that. So the Deering Farmhouse was built in 1807, and as Alex said, it's the last remaining structure from the Deering estate in Portland. It is on the Greater Portland Landmarks Places in Peril list, and while not listed on the National Register, it is of great interest to the City Historic Preservation Office. In this image, you see the original farmhouse on the right, and the L, which was added later in stages, on the left. The buildings were last in regular use about 10 years ago and have fallen into disrepair. The L, having been built segmentally and heavily modified, is in the worst condition and is not considered salvageable. However, it is still of historic interest, so the proposal is to add a new addition that speaks to the original, but in accordance with the historic preservation principles, it will be sufficiently contemporary and subordinate that it cannot be mistaken as being historic. This photo, this photo is taken from the approximate proposed new location of the farmhouse, which is about 50 feet to the northwest. This photo also shows some of the exterior degradation, and while it may just look like paint, on buildings this old, paint hides a lot, and in many cases it holds a lot together. These photos are from the interior when it was last in use. the hearth that you see and
Mike, I'm
and-
not sure that we're seeing that, or at least I'm not. I think we're still, at least I'm still stuck on the first slide.
Yeah, I am too, Mike. These don't seem to be advancing.
I think if you go in presentation mode, you might have better luck.
I am in presentation mode. Okay.
Yeah, we're not seeing that either.
Maybe you need to unshare and then reshare.
Yeah, why don't I do that? I apologize for the technical glitch here.
I'm seeing the interior photos now if others are, or it was.
What are people seeing now?
Can only speak for myself, Mike, but I see Deering Farmhouse first slide that we saw before.
Okay. What are the slides advancing now? Maybe there's just a latency that I'm.
Mike, when you share you're sharing the PowerPoint and not the presentation. So we were looking at your PowerPoint file right now. So if you just work from that'll work.
Yeah, my apologies on that. I tried this earlier and it seemed to work. So, okay. Are people seeing the presentation there then? I mean, the kind of the grassy back side of the building. Okay.
Yes.
My apologies again. We went through this before. So, let's see. Just kind of recapping. This photo is taken from the approximate proposed new location of the farmhouse. Degraded paint that you see on the back there is usually a sign of greater concern on buildings of this age. Interior photos here from when the building was last in use. You can see a hearth in both pictures. It's actually a two-sided hearth and it's the most prominent interior historic feature of the farmhouse and will be preserved as part of this process. The next few photos show the general condition. You can see some water damage in the photo on the right. On the left here, these are what are known as jack screws that are supporting one of the main beams in the original farmhouse. Not a sign of good structural health there. Some degraded foundation members here, continued water intrusion inside the attic, another degraded beam. You can kind of just go through that. This building needs some attention. Chimney on the right is on the original farmhouse, some voided mortar there and loose bricks. And then finally, some exterior photos here again, showing the degraded paint, which is likely hiding other issues. Finally, this last slide is a rendering of the proposed finished product with the new addition on the left that speaks from an architectural standpoint to the previous L. Kind of the windows are in the same spot, things like that. It connects into the original farmhouse in the same location, but has a clean break with a glass breezeway to ensure it's sufficiently distinct. I do want to add that the proposed designs and this whole design process was done with significant collaboration with the City Historic Preservation Office. Indeed, their director, our architectural design team, myself, CPPM staff, we literally sat around a table and tried to figure out what is the art of the possible and what is the best way forward. And this rendering is largely a result of that. In addition, the Greater Portland Landmarks have been brought into this process and they're fully supportive of the project as well. And indeed, they're actually quite excited at USM's effort to not only preserve this historic building, but to reactivate it and make it a fully used part of our campus again. And that is my last slide. And I welcome your questions.
The questions?
Mike, would you mind stopping the screen share?
Yes.
Alec, are you all set, or do you want to add anything before we go to questions?
No, Chair Cates, I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trustee Mishu.
quick question is, I know you mentioned several times about the historic opportunities here. Are there opportunities to get funding to actually from the historic preservations to really help with this as well?
It's a great question, Trustee Michoud. We've talked about historic philanthropy or historic oriented philanthropy, if you will. No developments to date, but would certainly stay on our radar going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee McMahon.
When we've done similar projects in the past and from another life, you always run into snags when you move an old building. How much contingency is built into the budget for things we don't know about specifically, but we know are going to be there?
Yeah, I'll take that, Alec. There's substantial contingency in this. Off the top of my head, I don't have the dollar amount dedicated directly to it, but we have design contingency, we have contractor contingency into this, and we have project owner contingency. They're all built into this $2 million number.
Trustee McMahon, we're of course happy to follow up with specifics on that. In particular, given what happened with the Academy building, where we came back to you all a second time after more rot was discovered on the interior of that building as soon as the siding was taken off, I think we're particularly sensitive to that. I really appreciate the question, and you're absolutely right with these historic projects. So we've tried to be pretty darn conservative here.
Other questions? Could you tell us how many square feet are we talking about here, both in the farmhouse itself and then the additional addition?
About 2,600 square feet.
I'm sorry, Mike, total or
total? When this project is done, about 2,600 square feet.
And again, the farmhouse is roughly how much of that?
1,750, I believe,
Okay.
1,700.
Trustee, thank you. Trustee Flood.
Thank you. I'm having a hard time finding $2 million worth of value in a structure that is that small, frankly. So I'm struggling with that, knowing how we're trying to find money for all these other things on our different campuses. And I see a building that hasn't been used for 10 years. It's tiny. And I just wonder if it would be better just to not have it, just to replace it and use the space for the other project that we're talking about. I feel it's important to just at least lay that scenario out there. I know it's not going to be a popular one with the folks who are on this call, but it just seems to me like that's an awful lot of money for a project that, in my personal view, doesn't really seem essential.
Trustee Flood, certainly understand that point and those cautions. And I definitely don't want to argue with them. I think I just share perspective on them. Our understanding is it would be very difficult to do something different with this building. I don't think there's an opportunity to move on from it. At one point, I know USM had looked into actually moving it, but because this is its location on the Deering estate, that becomes particularly challenging. And I don't think the city would allow demolition. I could be mistaken, but that's the information we've received. USM considered it an important asset to the Portland campus just because it is that last remaining vestige of the Deering estate. Were the CFA, the Center for the Arts, to be approved, this would become administrative space for the School of Music. We would put the School of Music director and other administrators in this building. At that point, it actually does become fairly cost effective because the cost per square foot of this restoration, although not de minimis, is considerably less than space in the Center for the Arts, just because that's such a specialized building. So that's the way we thought about it in terms of value. That being said, $2 million is a very real number. As Mike said, it includes a fair amount of contingency, but I think Trustee McMahon's point was well taken. So we wanted to put that number out there. Don't love it as a top line number, but those are some thoughts around that too. I think you're very well taken points.
Trustee Cates, could I just speak to that very briefly?
Please, go ahead, Chancellor, yes.
So this is an urban environment, and I have to say that now into my fourth year here, I have to say that Portland has actually treated us very well with respect to projects, and we would literally be putting our finger in their eye on this one, as well as the community that surrounds the campus. This is a building that has support by the folks who live in the residential portion of Portland bordering our campus. So I certainly understand that we have lots of old farmhouses in Maine, but we don't have a lot of old farmhouses in Portland, and I fear that this would impact and potentially, and I would say even beyond potentially, affect our relationship with Portland, and could expect that a pound of flesh might be taken.
And if I may also add, thank you for that, Chancellor. In the 1970s, the Deering Barn was removed from the campus amid some, I think, pretty significant student protests at the time.
Let me ask a couple of follow-ups if I could. In the development of the Center for the Arts, are you saying that the center was designed and costed out with the assumption that the offices were not going to be in it and were going to be elsewhere?
It's a good question, Trustee Cates. Our hope would be to put those offices there. We think it's a better use of space. That's one of the reasons we wanted to advance this initially.
Well, just to follow up, let's say we didn't do this with the farmhouse. Is there office space in the Center for the Arts, for the Center for the Arts staff?
There is office space. We would have to repurpose some of it. What would happen is some of those studios we talked about and so forth would probably have to be repurposed as the director's office and so forth. I think the bigger issue is right now, as we think about the Center for the Arts, Deering Farmhouse sits again in its northwesternmost part. So if you're advancing with that building with current site plan, you really do have to at least move the farmhouse.
Thank you. Chair Riley.
I share Trustee Flood's concerns about financing, but as somebody who lives in an old house, I also very much support the notion of supporting historic buildings, particularly in the cities. But I wonder if there isn't a middle ground here, given, we all are a little bit concerned, at least I am a little concerned, that this wasn't part of the broader proposal around the Center for the Arts, because it's clearly critical to it. But I wonder if this isn't something where the campus could commit itself to external funding in part or in whole, given the historic value, given the interest in Portland, and given the extraordinary success you've had around the Arts Center.
Trustee Riley, I think it's a very fair point and request. I'd be reluctant to volunteer the foundation on my own, and certainly on my last day, that seems like an unfair thing to do. But I do think that the 3-year funding cycle we described, where you would have into FY25 for that last $750,000 in funding that we're envisioning, presents that opportunity. And I think it would be a really good one. There is a lot of interest in historic preservation, whether it's this building on the Portland campus or a number of buildings that USM has in its Gorham campus historic district. The university is steward of a lot of these assets, and they don't repair and restore themselves, obviously, and they often come at quite a bit of an expense. The other thing with respect to this, the Chancellor mentioned urban environment, and I agree with everything the Chancellor said. I thought he laid out our situation very well. But the other point I make with respect to that urban space is that the site work here is a bit complicated as well, just where the building sits on our campus, and has added some cost to when you think of that overall top line figure.
Thank you. I think one of you mentioned some, and I appreciate everything the Chancellor said about the community importance of this building. Did I hear somebody say that we might not be able to get permission for a demolition, assuming that's what we had chosen to do. I'm not suggesting we do that, but I heard somebody say we need the city's permission to do so, and perhaps that might not be forthcoming.
Yeah, so the question was asked at a meeting, Trustee Cates. I didn't ask it myself, but it was asked, and council told us that the city would absolutely reject that. Now, that was just council's opinion, but she has her finger on the pulse of Portland as far as I can tell, and that's borne out over the past several years of permitting. So certainly took that to heart.
Trustee Michaud.
Yeah, I appreciate Trustee Flood's concerns, and I can understand the importance of this where it is a historic facility. And I mentioned about historic funding. I would strongly encourage, it might be a qualified, because I know the city's received a lot of money for ARPA funding. Is this an opportunity to, if it is qualifies, to use ARPA funding to actually to help offset the cost of this renovation?
Trustee Michaud, I think we could certainly pursue that. I think all of those ideas should be on the table.
Other questions? Alec or President Edmondson, could you tell us the timing of this, and is this time critical? Is this something we could think about a little bit more and explore those other potential opportunities, or is this something where there's the clock is ticking in some sense?
Trustee Cates, let me give you the background I have, and I may ask Mike to weigh in as well, just because he's been leading the day-to-day on this. The way we look at it is that this would need to happen in advance of the Center for the Arts, just because of moving the building. The full restoration doesn't need to happen, but you need to have it moved off the current site if you're going to move forward with the Center for the Arts. That requires permitting in advance of that as well with the city, and the city is doing its very best, and the chancellor was right. They've been an excellent partner to us, but permitting is not seamless there. The idea would be hopefully break ground for the Center of the Arts in July. And obviously there will be a whole lot more that this committee and others talk about that. I don't want to be presumptuous, but just linking it all together, for that to happen, you would need permission to move the Deering Farmhouse, and of course authorization from this committee to move forward with any of those steps. Mike, do you want to share a little bit more detail? You and I had talked about this, and forgive me if I'm not remembering everything you said.
I think you summarized it fairly well there, Alec. I mean, if the CFA project were to be approved, we definitely want shovels in the ground on that in July to meet a completion date that meets the start of a fall semester 2 years later. You start backing kind of the timeline up from that, and when you have to do the site work to support the relocation of the farmhouse, and just the site work and the move, as Alex said, not the interior renovation or even the construction of the L at that point. Excuse me. You quickly get into springtime, frankly, early April, as soon as the ground can be worked, and being able to get a permit, being able to move forward, that puts us where we are with this meeting today.
Thank you. Other questions or concerns? Well, I think we've got a couple of alternatives here. One is we can certainly move ahead with the motion and see what the vote is. Secondly, and I'd defer to Paul Chan on this, this issue involves a question of disposition of real estate. It seems to me that, unless, Paul, you say I'm wrong, that we could choose to go into executive session to further discuss these sensitive issues, some of which are perfectly appropriate for executive session. Or the third option I see is to table this, which doesn't sound like such a great idea, frankly. So maybe I'm missing an option. So what's the pleasure of the board? Chair Riley.
I wonder if there's another option in which we would amend the motion or do a separate motion to compel the University of Southern Maine to develop a strategy for external funding, historic tax credits, ARPA, et cetera, to offset these costs. and that we would hold their feet to the fire on that.
Reaction to the chair's suggestion by folks from USM?
I am certainly open to exploring what other sources of funding may be available for this project. So that's fine with me.
So I'm not.
And Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry. Yes.
I will say, I'm not sure that this is eligible for historic tax funding. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alec, because of the addition that was put onto the building. And so that I don't think that is one of our options. Is that correct, Alec, or am I misremembering that?
No, I believe the real issue, though, is that it's not on the historic register. So unless I'm mistaken, we would have to get this listed on the historic register before we could go to the credits. The addition to the building might be a factor as well, President Edmondson, but the fact that it's not on the register, I think would prevent that.
And is the addition required? Would the cost be less to move just the building?
Well, there is an addition on the building now that was added. That's what I'm referring to, not a new addition. Current addition.
But you're going to take that down and build a new one. Would the cost be less if you move just the building and not build the addition?
I can answer that. Yes, it would be less. However, that addition is of historical interest. It was built after the original farmhouse, but it was still a 19th century structure. The manner in which it was built and added on in segments, it leads to its nature of not being salvageable. The foundation under it is just a mishmash of different things, honestly. In our conversations with the City Historic Preservation Office, it was, we needed to do something to, we couldn't just demolish the addition and walk away. There needed to be something that acknowledged the fact that, hey, this was it may have been just a mashed together structure from the 19th century, but it was still a 19th century structure.
Yeah, Chair Riley, it's a really good question. It's something we thought about initially because it doesn't look historically significant the way the original structure does. I actually thought it was a newer, like 1920s edition. As Mike said, it actually is of historical significance because it was added not too long after the construction of the building itself, and Historic Preservation in Portland, made that clear to us.
Thank you. Trustee Flood, did you have your hand up?
I did. And I realized I've created a long discussion on a relatively small project, given all the other things we talk about. And I want to apologize for that, but it just seems like it was important to at least bring that up. I hearken back to the Chancellor's very good comment that struck me, is that this would be, if we don't do something with this building and restoring the building, he mentioned it's like a poke in the eye to the city of Portland, and I certainly don't want to do that. That's not my intention. My intention was just to draw focus to the finances of something that seemed kind of de minimis in a way, but also it really hurt because we spent our morning looking for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and here's $2 million, and it just doesn't feel quite right to me. But I think there's a solution. The solution is you pass the motion, you move on. But on the other hand, that just doesn't seem like it's been completely well vetted. So I'm still a little concerned about it, but I'm not trying to rock the ship, but I think it's just, it doesn't seem to fit well with the other projects we're working on. It's not anybody's fault that building is there, and we got to do something with it. I get that. I understand that. So I think finding some other funding to help us with this project makes it passable in my mind. It just seems like if it's there for other people to enjoy, we'll be spending all the funds to make this thing happen when we're kind of doing it for a broader population of people. That's all. So is there a broader population of funding? That's the only thing I would request we continue to at least look at.
So Chair, let me volunteer myself, Ryan, and Sam, who's also on this call, to hold Southern Maine's feet to the fire on exhausting all opportunities to A, cut the cost if that's possible, and B, to access additional monies, whether they're philanthropic or state or federally funded. I am nervous about sending the wrong message to a community that has been very good to us with respect to approving our projects on that campus. And if we could move this forward with the understanding that we need to report back to the board on what's happening with respect to additional funds, I think that would be a good way to proceed. You know, goodwill once lost is hard to earn back.
Understood.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ryan.
Yeah, I was just going to note, I mean, as Alex said at the beginning, this is kind of funded across 3 fiscal years. I mean, I wonder if there's not a scenario where we move forward with this initial 500,000 that was part of the capital plan that allows them to move forward. And then we report back on the other sources. And if we can't find other sources, then we come back and we tell you that, and we look to E&G for that. If we find other sources, then that's great as well. But it would allow the project to at least move forward. And we, as the Chancellor said, we could commit to coming back and seeing if we can identify other non-E&G sources for phase 2 and phase 3.
Thank you. That seems to be a decent middle ground here. Chair Riley, do you agree with that? And if so, do you want to try to verbally amend the motion which is going to be before us? Or are you comfortable with what Ryan has said?
I'm comfortable with what Ryan said. Are you suggesting, though, Ryan, that we change it from a $2 million authorization to a 500,000 at this point?
No, I think the resolution as it exists is fine. It's the details where we talk about where it's funded. And again, we'd use this first year with E&G as we proposed, and it was part of the budget. But then for part 2 and part 3, we wouldn't use E&G funds unless we came back and we had a very specific conversation with this committee and got your sign off.
Yep, I think that makes all the sense in the world. We have another bite at this, and the minutes would clearly reflect the concerns and the balancing of this historic building with our budget challenges. So it makes perfect sense. Thanks, Chair Cates.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read the motion as drafted and see if there's any further discussion. So I'll read the text of the resolution that the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded for consideration at the January 29-30, 2023 board meeting, that the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and authorizes the University of Maine system, acting through the University of Southern Maine, to expend up to $2 million to renovate and relocate the Deering Farmhouse located on the Portland campus. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Flood and seconded by Chair Riley. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Ellen, could you call the roll?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
Trustee Flood,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Michoud,
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. And I'm sure the minutes will accurately reflect this discussion. So thank you all. And Alec, just a word of thanks on behalf of this committee for all of your work over the years. Some of us knew you from your previous life in state government. The system is poorer for your leaving, but good luck with all your new ventures.
Thank you very much, Chair Cates. I really appreciate that. There's a tremendous team at the university from the president on down, and I've been really proud to be a part of it. And, also to work for Ryan for these 4 years. I don't want to embarrass Ryan too much, but what you see is what you get. He's as terrific to work for all of us as he is for you all to work with. And I've got one more item that I'm going to participate in, so I don't want to get too carried away here. But I tried to pick really simple ones for my last day.
Well, you can take with you that you are personally responsible for us running over time today.
I know, Trustee Cates, that I've worked hard over the years to be brief too, so I apologize.
Thanks.
Trustee Cates, I have to get to another meeting, so if there are questions that anyone would have of me on their perusal of the projects that are still coming before you, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, I think I'm very well represented by Ryan and the other vice chancellors who are following the discussion. I will be getting into a car to get down to Portland, and I'll try to follow along at that time as well.
Thank you, Chancellor. Any questions for the Chancellor on the next couple of agenda items? I don't see any, so thank you, sir.
Okay.
We'll
Thank you.
continue on. So going on to tab 5, Center for Teaching Innovation Renovation, University of Southern Maine, again to be presented by President Edmondson.
Thank you. I hope this one's a little less complicated. So the Center for Teacher Innovation is a long planned project in Bailey Hall on the Gorham campus. And this would renovate approximately 3,200 square feet on the building's 3rd floor. The project focuses on creating spaces for continued education of our teacher education students and others on new technology and resources that are used in the classroom. Our Dean of the College of Management and Human Services, Joe Williams, will share a few more details about the project.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. We're really excited about this project, and I'm happy to share with you why we think it's so important. We see the Center of Teaching Innovation as a one-stop place to support our student success, and we really believe it's going to help us in recruiting and retaining teacher educators. The center really has 2 areas of focus. The first is it's built around a sense of community and relationships. So to that end, we are relocating faculty offices. We will have a graduate assistant in the center, and also our academic advisor who works with the teacher education students. We really intend to build it as a community space that's open, that students can use for a variety of purposes, and it will support them personally and professionally as they go through our programs. The other exciting part of the center, it comes from the technology and the resources that are in this space. It's a multi-purpose space. It has flexible use. We'll be building new technology spaces in there. Our idea and goal is to create basically a simulation space so that our students can use the technologies that they will be expected to use when they go out into the schools. We'll be installing that technology, and currently we don't have that on campus, so it will be a really significant addition for us. The other spaces are a maker space that's designed for promotion of creativity and collaboration. We have a curriculum resource lab in the space as well. And we see this space as a building block for the work that happens in our teacher ed methods courses. So the faculty will use the space and the resources in their classes, as well as allowing our students to come in and practice or prepare materials for their internships when they themselves go into the classroom. I think I'll stop there. I know we're over time, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I apologize. Thank you very much, Joe. Any questions for Joe Williams or the president about this project? Yes, Trustee Alexander.
Obviously, I would defer to committee members who may have questions, but I did want to bring up or ask for a discussion of this reference here to the materials we have. And this section is called Unified Accreditation Connection. It says the Center for Teaching Innovation Center provides an opportunity to build on the existing system collaboration, including teacher residency and the MED instructional technology. Could someone explain exactly what that means and what analysis has been done with respect to the implication of this project in terms of competing for students who are entering teacher training among several of our universities in this system? Thank you.
Sure, I'll take a first pass at that, and Dean Williams, if you want to provide backup if I'm missing something, but this does not present a problem of competition with teacher education programs across the system. Instead, I think it really helps to enhance collaboration through the uses of technology. The residency program that I believe you're referring to, we have Dr. Flynn Ross is leading a teacher residency program that involves all 7 of the universities within the University of Maine system to enhance the teacher education pipeline for teachers, and that was funded in part through a federal earmark.
I can add a little bit more just on the collaboration side. We really don't see this as a tool in competition, but to further our collaboration with the other campuses. And the 2 examples that were provided are current collaborations. But the space itself is built with technologies to allow opportunities for people to participate in programming that's from a virtual place through technology. And one of our additional goals with this center is to continue to expand our programming that we do for teachers who are already out there in the field and teachers across the state. And that could equally apply to our other partners in the system, students on other campuses who will be able to join the programming virtually.
And could I ask a follow-up?
Please, go ahead, trustee.
And has this particular project been the discussion among other campuses with respect to what their needs are to support their teacher education programs? Particularly, I know Farmington emphasizes a lot of activity with respect to working with current teachers to do work, as well as training new teachers in their campus. So I'm just asking for the internal kind of coordination that goes on with the expansion of this program, which clearly would be used to recruit students to come to University of Southern Maine. I think we would agree with that.
I can answer that. We have, I believe that our plans have been shared in a number of different forums with teacher education programs across the system. We haven't got into the specifics because this has been a work in progress for quite a long time. But I can assure you that our faculty and teacher in the School of Education and Human Development are really strong collaborators across the system. They work regularly with their partners in the other teacher education programs. So I would expect that to continue. And, our goal is really to support workforce development for teachers across the state. And we understand collaborating with our sisters in the system is important.
Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, then let me read the text of
I just had a quick question. It wasn't a question. I wanted to chime in. Carolyn Dorsey.
Hi, Carolyn. Sorry.
Hi. No, it's okay. Just wanted to chime in on their behalf to sort of answer Trustee Alexander's question from a system perspective, because I know the 2 folks that answered were from that campus. So I thought it would be good to, hear from someone off the campus. So they're both correct. The education program, since I've been at the system for the last 2 years, they have really been incredibly collaborative. They meet regularly with all of the education leads from across the system, the different campuses that offer programming, and have looked at ways where they can collaborate on a lot of their online and remote learning opportunities. And although I'm not sure of the specifics of this project, we have had many discussions on it in that system-wide group, and it really is geared towards folks that USM is servicing that the other campuses wouldn't, or it would offer opportunities for the other campuses to participate in that activity. So it is not considered, from our view, something that is competitive. It is something that has been discussed and would work collaboratively.
Just one follow-up, please.
Yes, Trustee Alexander.
In the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, there is maybe too bureaucratically heavy, but there is a process that requires sign off and documentation of collaboration with respect to new programs. that come to us for our approval. And I just was struck by the lack of any documentation about that process in this type of proposal. And wondering if there might not have to be some sort of system sign off about the level of coordination and discussion about these kinds of investments that the Finance Committee is seeing, that would assure us of some of the background that you have described, but for which we don't have any real information. It's a suggestion for.
No, absolutely. It's a great suggestion. And actually, after the ASA committee, we've met as a group with vice chancellors and the chancellor and have looked at the process by which we document what happens on the academic programming side. We can do the same for this, make sure that there's something that goes into these proposals that will relate to the academic side of funding and new space and things like that, new technologies. We can absolutely add that. And it's a very good suggestion.
Thank you. And thanks for the suggestion, Trustee Alexander. Trustee Riley.
Recognizing I'm incurring your wrath and taking us for messing up the timing, but I would just add a friendly amendment to that, because I think it's important when we look at some of these issues, particularly around education, to think about, where I assume students still have to student teach in communities. And I'd be really intrigued to know how many, the radius of where students from each university are doing their student teaching. And if we know where they go to work post-degree, I think that would be an important thing to think about as we think about the role of education at all the different universities.
Thank you. Is that information available? I don't mean this morning, but is that something we have?
I should probably let someone from the education program answer, but yes, I know the campuses, they collect that data on their student teachers, where they're teaching, where they're located. We could easily pull that together.
Thank you. President Farini Mundy.
Thank you. I just wanted to chime in to add additional suggestion about how we are talking system-wide about some of these issues. One topic here is that the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan dollars, which are federal dollars coming through the state, that have come to the system and are being administered through system processes. I see Sam Warren here, Sam, Ryan, and I, and many others are involved in that process. A piece of those dollars was reserved for small campus initiatives or smaller campus initiatives. And some of those funds are actually going to this center, the USM Center for Teaching Innovation, to enable them to really work with this kind of technology and build some cutting edge experience for us that can be deployed system-wide, because it's such an important need for K-12 teachers to have this technology experience. And so the idea is that they'll be heavily involved in it, but it's something that we're watching from the level of the system and have reviewed and been discussing at the system level.
Thank you. Other questions or comments about this? Thank you. Chair Riley, you had said something about a friendly amendment, but didn't sound like you were really talking about.
I'm sorry, just in terms of what we follow up with. Okay. No, I'm sorry.
Okay. So seeing nothing further, I'm going to read the text of the proposed motion. That the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee authorizes the University of Maine system, authorizes the University of Maine system acting through the University of Southern Maine to expend up to $700,000 to renovate 3,240 square feet of space for the Center for Teaching Innovation located on the third floor of Bailey Hall on the Gorham campus. And as I understand it, we approve this at the committee level. This, I don't even know this even goes to the board, or if it does, it goes on the consent agenda, Ellen?
No, it's within the committee purview. It will not be going forward to the board meeting.
All right, so we are the final decision maker here. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by attorney. Trustee Michaud. Second?
Second.
Second by Trustee Flood. Ellen, can you call the roll?
Trustee Cates.
Yes.
Trustee Flood.
Yes.
Trustee McMahon.
Yes.
Trustee Michaud.
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. We'll move on to tab 6, the Medical Laboratory Technology Space Renovation Project budget increase at UMA. President Zakis, good morning.
Good morning, folks. So this project was approved by the board in March of last year. The issue now is just dealing with the construction costs. And as a reminder, before I hand it off to Buster, is that the Medical Laboratory Technology Program has been a long-standing partnership with the University of Maine at Presque Isle and also Maine General Hospital. Recently, and just like what President Farini Mundy mentioned, the MLT program was awarded about $750,000 for the Maine Jobs Recovery Act funds for equipment upgrades on both campuses. And this work, again, is to the lab expansions needed to meet the needs, the state workforce needs, in part of our goal of doubling the number of graduates needed in this joint program. It is a true collaboration with the University of Maine at Presque Isle. We have had this working, and this is just another effort to keep addressing the workforce needs. And I'll hand it off to Buster now. Thank you.
Thank you, President Zakis and Chair Cates. In the interest of time, I'll hit the high points here, and then we'll fill in the blanks if you have questions. But as President Zakis mentioned, this is a project you approved in March. Shortly after that, we took the time to evaluate and assess location and wanted to be sure that we came up with the best possible solution that we could. And thanks so much to Ryan Lowe, David Demers, Gretchen Catlin, who all worked with us, and we came up with the best solution to be Robinson Hall. Since then, we've been going through the design effort. We've looked for efficiencies and all ways that we could to cut back costs, but the hyperinflation is just catching up with us. So we're coming to you today asking to increase that $1.65 million budget you approved to $2 million. On the good side, the funding that will be utilized for that difference will come from federal HERF funds. On the not so good side, the reason those funds are available is that you approved another project at Hanley Hall. And unfortunately, when we bid that project, we got no bids. So we're addressing that issue a floor at a time in Hanley Hall, but that frees up that $350,000 for us. So over time, we'll get all of Hanley Hall done, but it's going to take us a little longer. So Chair Cates, we ask for your approval to move forward, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, sir. Questions for the president or for Buster Neal? Yes, Trustee Alexander.
Well, I would had the same initial set of comments or questions and would ask for a little bit more discussion of the how this fits in with the collaboration with the University of Maine at Presque Isle. And if there is more background that could be provided at this meeting or in subsequent descriptions here, that would help me understand the system collaboration aspect of this, what seems to be a very worthy project. So I'm not questioning the lab as such, just the understanding of how this works with the unified accreditation statement that's on the document here. Thank you.
I'll start with that, and then so as I said, this is a shared program. So we only teach half the curriculum. The University of Maine at Presque Isle teaches the other half of the curriculum. Our current lab is actually in Maine General Hospital, and it is a very small lab, and we are able to produce about 8 graduates a year, at least from the UMA side. And so as soon as they are, as soon as they graduate, they are in, they are hired, and the needs are still there, post pandemic, which is where we got the funds for. So by trying, and there's no expansion opportunities there at Maine General. So we have an opportunity to kind of provide that expansion here in concert with Presque Isle. Again, I think this is completely in line with unified accreditation. We are sharing resources. Our students are benefiting from both the expertise of both campuses. And because of the investment that we're making, this gives us a toehold, I think, to look towards Lewiston and others as we keep trying to move to meet the state workforce needs in a really high need area of medical laboratory technologists. So, thank you.
Thank you, President. President Farini Mundy.
I would just give additional context here. This proposal has been has been examined at the system level. Of course, these are the right two institutions to be taking this forward. It was an earmark request, not funded, but heavily reviewed and carefully studied by lots of places. And partial funding does come from the Maine Jobs Recovery Program Small Campus Initiative, where we have people examining these projects from across the system and then trying to help strengthen them as much as possible as we move them toward funding.
Thank you. And speaking of earmarks, I know that someone is going to present for the Board of Trustees a summary system-wide of what earmarks Samantha and the Chancellor and others were able to achieve for us. So we'll be getting a list of those at some point.
We also have that on the agenda for your March meeting, your March FFT meeting, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. We were talking the other day, earmarks is changed from a dirty word to a good thing.
Yeah, for a few
Okay, any further discussion on this agenda item?
Could I just ask a follow-up, please?
Please, go ahead.
How does a lab based in Southern Maine help the students located in Presque Isle? I mean, you can't do lab work virtually. So does Presque Isle have a lab? And is that program somewhere already in the works?
They already have an existing lab on campus. Carolyn, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, they do. They have a lab equal to what President Zenkis said. It could be bigger, that they could expand in the Presque Isle area as well, because they put through as many students as they can. And there's always a demand for more space anywhere in the state. It would be helpful to have space because the students can, are mobile in what they can do in the different locations in which they can practice. But the University of Maine at Presque Isle does have its own physical space, and then the UMA has theirs.
And just to add a little more to that is that, so we have students all over the state who either drive to the University of Maine at Presque Isle, or they drive to the University of Maine Augusta. And some of the students from the University of Maine at Presque Isle actually do their lab work here. And if our students are in Bangor, it makes sense to go up to Presque Isle for timing and coordination. We allow that to happen. And so by just having a few more microscopes and those sort of things, we can do more. And from everything we've seen in terms of from our discussion with the hospitals, especially in the Lewiston area, this is step one, and I think we would be coming with other opportunities in the Lewiston area as we keep moving forward. Thank you.
Also, the director of that program from the University of Maine at Presque Isle had talked to me about several conversations that she has with the folks at UMA, and they're incredibly collaborative in how they're supporting and servicing the students at both locations.
Thank you. You all set, trustee? Okay, thank you. Any further questions or comments? I'm seeing none. Let me read the text of the proposed resolution. That the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded to the consent agenda for Board of Trustees approval at the January 29/30/2023 board meeting. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee and authorizes the University of Maine system acting through the University of Maine at Augusta to expend an additional $350,000, bringing the approved project expenditure up to $2 million to renovate Robinson Hall on the Augusta campus and to develop a laboratory for the Medical Laboratory Technology academic program. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Mishu, seconded by Trustee Flood. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Ellen, could you call the roll?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
Trustee Flood,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Mishu,
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. So we'll move on to tab 7, which is our usual review of IT projects with a value of $250,000 or greater, presented by CIO David Demers. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Cates and members of the FFT committee. Chair Cates, I don't know that I'm going to be able to get you back and take a chunk out of where we are behind. My computer's freezing up. Are you able to see the slide? No?
No, we can't.
Try this again.
Now we
Any
can see
better?
it, David.
All right, sorry about that. Zoom sometimes gives me bits and starts here. All right, so let's go through this fairly quickly. First project I want to report on is the voice over IP implementation at University of Southern Maine. They were pleased to report that this project is essentially complete. I just have a few additional punch list items to check off the list, but we have wrapped this project up. So thank you for your support. We are now fully on voice over IP for our telephony system across the system, and it is working as expected. The biggest project that I do want to take some time on is the repaving Main Street project. This one is critical to our future support of the Unified Accreditation Initiatives. I think you have all seen these slides before, but I put them here for background and context. We're really aiming to overhaul our core ERP platform to support and promote operational efficiency and collaboration opportunities across all of our campuses, and to really eliminate a lot of the customizations that we have in our current environment that impede our ability to keep up to date with developments in the technology space. You have allocated $16.8 million to help us move in this direction, and we are breaking it down into two distinct projects. One is a migration of our HR and finance systems into a cloud-enabled solution. The Oracle Fusion product is what we are migrating to. I'll talk a little bit more about a change in that particular project on the next slide. And then the other big piece is the re-implementation of our student information system. So that's the campus solutions overhaul. So that will remain on premise, and we are underway in planning for that work. So the biggest update that I need to give you is that we previously we had broken down the cloud migration into 3 phases. First one was going to be going live with HR recruiting in May of 2023. Because of limitations within the Oracle Cloud product we are migrating to, we had hoped that we'd be able to go live with that product using data structures that reflect our current system, our current HR environment, and then replace those data structures with a future focused functionality in mind for the full rollout of the HR environment. Unfortunately, the cloud space doesn't allow you to sort of press the button to wipe the slate clean and then start over from scratch, which is what we were hoping to do. So that forced us to think a little bit differently about how we would go live with these products. And what we did get approval for from our steering committee was to actually collapse the 3 phases into 2 phases. So instead of going live with HR recruitment first, we are going to actually go live with recruitment alongside of our full HR rollout. And that timeline has not changed. We are still anticipating to go live with the full HR rollout in January of 2024. Everything else is still in place. It's just a matter of pushing that HR recruitment into the full HR environment timeline. So we have actually continued to work on the rollout of what the recruitment and the core HR initial applications are going to look like. We've gotten some sign off on some initial review of what the environment looks like, as well as developing some self-guided training sessions. We're still in the process of defining some structures, including a revised department structure supporting all of the campuses. The structures need to be consistent between finance and HR, so that's different than what we have today. So we are taking our time to make sure that we are making those decisions correctly. We have also continued work on the discovery phase of the campus solution overhaul, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. In terms of where we are from the technology side of the fence, we do have our environments up and running. We have the HR system figured, it's at least live. We are looking at getting our first look at the full HR environment application review in just a couple of months, toward the end of February. And then we will actually be able to get our hands dirty to see how the system is operating for us, what additional adjustments need to be made, and where we have some gaps in between our expectations and what the product is delivering, so we can accommodate those in our timeline. We are still doing the technical analysis of the campus solution environment. However, we are still engaging with stakeholders to make sure we are capturing all the needs. So what I'm going to present here is an update to that project timeline that I've shared in the past. The first biggest change being that we've collapsed HR recruitment and the full HR rollout into a single phase that is going to be called phase 1, where our anticipated go live for that is still going to be January of 2024. Phase 2 will be the full finance and EPM rollout. So that's going to be budget, procurement, all of the things that we do for financial planning, general ledger purchasing, and all of those things that are related to the fiscal operation of the university system. We're still in the initial planning and design phase of that particular environment, making decisions as we are going along. But we are still hopeful to hit the go live for that particular environment in July 2024. I think the slides that you had that date incorrect as January 2024, so I apologize for that. So I highlighted it here. That should have been July 2024. And on the campus solution side, this one's a little more, we're still on development phase of figuring out what the implementation plan is going to be. But we are still doing the initial discovery sessions. We've wrapped up the initial discovery sessions with all of our functional offices. We now have sessions scheduled with faculty and students for later this month. And then we're going to enter sort of the analysis phase. So we're going to take feedback that we've received, identify and highlight those key opportunities that we are seeing that will help move the needle to create efficiencies in the student information system to better serve our students and create more collaboration opportunities for our colleagues in academic affairs. So on the campus solutions reimplementation side, as I said, we've completed the initial discovery sessions with our functional offices, and we're looking at where we prioritize those opportunities and alleviate current pain points. The next phase of that is to actually take that information and distill it down into a preliminary implementation plan. We expect to have that implementation plan completed before we start the fall semester. And then what that will allow us to do is to begin to start developing some prototypes, actually start building some functionality to test and make sure that what we are aiming to do is going to work for our entire population as expected. So lots of moving pieces to coordinate, hundreds of people involved in this project. And I do need to comment to the board that thus far, we have been very gratified with the engagement that we've seen from all campuses. Their participation has been enthusiastic, to say the least, and we are really hoping that we can make this work well for the University of Maine system going forward. The last thing I want to note, and I mentioned this during the last update, is that while we are looking to go live with a new campus solutions environment sometime in the fall of 2026, that does not mean that nothing will be done between now and then. We are going to be building incremental changes to the current campus solutions environment and deploying those we can prior to that fall 2026 date. So there's going to be incremental development of some of these things, and will obviously incorporate some of the work that Jeff St. John has been leading on the unified catalog front, as well as the study waveform process. Those will be built into this timeline to make sure that we are incorporating those into our overall implementation plan. So that is a whirlwind tour of where we are on the repaving Main Street project. Chair Cates, I'm happy to pause here, or if you'd like to just jump to the state of IT report, I can take questions at the end.
Why don't you do that, Dave? Thank you.
Very good. So luckily for us, the first item that I'd like to highlight in the state of IT report, other than the fact that, as you recall, we have migrated to an electronic format for this newsletter. The links are here. I encourage you to take a look at it. It really encapsulates a lot of the work that has been done over the past year. I really wanted to focus and pull out three things in particular that you'll see in this report. One of them we've already covered in the Repaving Main Street project. But the two other ones I don't think I have the opportunity to update the board or the FT committee on of late. And that is a rollout of a managed print services environment and multi-factor authentication to improve our information security posture. So
Hey,
as
David,
I said, we've already talked.
just a heads up, your audio is getting a little bit worse as you go along.
Let me turn my video off and see if that helps. Let me change this here. Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So the state of IT report includes the repaving Main Street update. We've already talked about that. I'm not going to belabor it. Let's talk about the multi-factor authentication piece next. So first, what is multi-factor authentication? I think you have all been exposed to it. If you do any transactions in a banking environment, all of them require multi-factor authentication right now. Basically, it just allows you to use more than one piece of information to authenticate yourself in an external system. So that typically is a combination of a password along with some second factor, whether that's a biometric device or getting something approved on your phone. So doing those two in concert creates a login credential for you, and you were able to access the system that you're looking to get into. This is a proven strategy that has helped mitigate the likelihood of cyber attacks, particularly credential harvesting that is typically done through phishing activities. So even if somebody gets a hold of your password, if you inadvertently give it to them, they will not be able to log in or access your account without that second factor. So it is really considered a core component of a strong identity access management policy, and we are pleased to be able to roll this out and make it happen for the University of Maine system. We have been able to partner with Internet2, the Internet2 consortia, of which we are members, to get really preferable licensing costs on deploying the Duo multi-factor authentication system. Duo is the leading multi-factor authentication provider in the higher education space, and we have been piloting it for the past several months. We have just wrapped up that initial pilot to work with some core constituents, those that have direct access to key financials system, as well as the entire IT staff, and really to iron out any of the technical kinks of the system and make sure that it is working appropriately. So what this system does is it ties in directly to our single sign-in system. And what will happen when you try to access your portal or Main Street is it will ask you to then send a push or send a multi-factor authentication request to whatever device you have set up. So again, in most cases, that's going to be an application on your phone or your smartphone. When you log in, it'll say, send me a request. And then what happens is you'll get the notification on your phone. You click, yes, that's me, and it logs you in. And then you have a persistent single sign-on credential that will actually allow you to access any of the systems by which you can access through SSO. We are making it generally available to faculty and staff this year, and we are already providing access to the system at the University of Maine, who is using mobile credentials in particular, but we will have a more broad availability of students as we work through the budget impact for fiscal 24. So this is up and running, it is working, and we are actually rolling out enhanced functionality to the platform later this year, including the ability to have multiple multi-factor authentication devices connected to your account. So if you don't have your smartphone with you, you will be able to use an alternative method to have that MFA authenticate who you are. So this is good news, and also a requirement for cyber liability insurance, which we were not eligible for last year because we did not have MFA in place. Last item I wanted to update folks on real quickly is that we are migrating to a managed print services contract for the past several years, 8 or 9 years. We have been operating under Canon equipment for multi-factor, multi-function devices, that's print and copy. These are network connected devices. When we purchased those devices, they had a projected service lifespan of 5 to 6 years, and Canon stocks parts for these devices for about 5 or 6 years. So you can do the math there, and you can see that we are oversubscribed on those devices, and they are becoming more unserviceable as we continue the use of those particular devices on campuses. So last year we did do an RFP to actually see where we were, what opportunities we might be able to have to move to another provider, or to see what Canon could do to actually refresh our fleet. We did award the managed print services contract to Xerox, and we have been working on a plan to roll out a comprehensive managed print services program. What managed print services does for us is it ensures that every user has a consistent experience when they walk up to one of these devices. So this means that instead of printing to a device, what individuals will do from their desktop or their tablet or their phone is they're going to print to a queue. And from that queue, you will be able to go up to any device and retrieve your print job. because all the devices that we will be deploying are going to have similar functionality, similar interfaces, and all tied into a single back-end financial system. The other thing that we're going to be able to roll out is enhanced security with this environment. So right now we are plagued with individuals that might print a sensitive document and then get a phone call. They pick up the phone call and they forget that they printed the sensitive document, and now it's sitting on a copy machine somewhere down the hall and somebody else can pick it up. So what this environment is going to allow us to do is deploy a click to release type of functionality, meaning that you can print as many documents as you want to a device. You would walk up to the device, you'd swipe your ID card, and it will show you what is available for you to just click the button and say, yes, print that piece of information out for me at that particular point in time. It will also help mitigate the waste of paper that we often see with uncollected print jobs on these devices, and that will help drive some environmental sustainability of this program. At the end of the day, we will see improved efficiency and a reduction in cost because of the fact that we will be using less paper. We will be using devices that cost less to print on a piece of paper, and the electrical usage on these devices are also considered high efficiency. So the methodology that we're going with here is to do an optimization strategy. So as Xerox has come in, they're looking and mapping out where we have these Canon devices. They are making recommendations to the campuses to say, this is what you can do to reduce your footprint, to optimize the use of the devices that we're going to deploy. The campuses ultimately have the ultimate power to say, this is how many devices I want on each floor in each building. So that directly has an impact on potential cost savings. And what we've seen is campuses are opting to try to reduce their print fleet as much as possible. The other thing that we're going to be able to see is a single financial business model, meaning printing a job at one campus will be the same cost as printing it anywhere. What that will allow us to also do is means that anyone on a, let's say up in Presque Isle, if they're coming down for a Board of Trustees meeting at the University of Southern Maine, you could print an entire book up at the University of Maine at Presque Isle and not have to carry that book with you down to Southern Maine. You could actually walk up to a device at Southern Maine, swipe your card, print that job out, and collect it at that site. And then it would automatically be charged to your account as you would expect. Again, this is all because we will be deploying devices that all have the same capabilities, and the consistent access to that user interface is going to be critical for this. So we are already deploying these devices. In fact, if you have toured the new 300 4th Street location, they have a shiny new Xerox device or a couple deployed at that particular location. And our timeline and our plan is to get the majority of new devices deployed by the end of March, so that we can make this consistent user experience available to everyone. So with that, again, I'm going to have the links here to the State of IT report. Lots of great information in there. We appreciate your support for our organization and what we do to support the campuses, and welcome any feedback that you might have. So with that, Chair Cates, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for cramming a lot of information into a short period of time, as you always do. Questions for Dave Demers? Yes, so Trustee Michoud.
Yep. Thank you, Trustee. Just a quick question. I see where this will work well on all the different campuses. My question is, how will this work in the satellite facilities where you have both the university and the community college system in that same building?
So we haven't explored how to tie in the financials system to the community college tenants, if you will, but we do have plenty of folks that use access to copy and print machines in libraries for open to the public. So there will be the ability for an individual to acquire a card that they'll be able to charge their prints to. So there's going to be there needs to be a financial backend to charge the print jobs to. So this system that we are deploying gives us the flexibility to have those different financial models to support different arrangements like that. So I hope that addresses your question, but we haven't actually focused specifically on that. And I thought we were talking about potentially different satellite locations and cooperative extension locations. And just I'm going to get out in front of that horse Right now, that is considered phase 2. So we're focusing on the main campus locations for phase 1 to get those devices deployed in March. And then we will turn our focus to getting all of the other systems that have these Canon devices on them and these other locations updated with new equipment in the very near future.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee McMahon.
One of the things that always bugs me about printing is the way people print on one side of a piece of paper when there are two sides of a piece of paper. Is the default system here two-sided printing, so people have to actually make a conscious decision to do single side?
Trustee McMahon, I'm going to take that as a recommendation that and we're going to call it the McMahon printing protocol. And I'm being facetious, but yes, that is going to be the default. And I don't get too much in the weeds, but obviously an individual would be able to override that at the time that they release the job. In addition to that, they can specify when they print that they want to override the duplexing functionality for a single-sided print. And then they will be asked again to confirm that that is what they want when they release the job. So we're trying to reduce as much paper utilization as possible to be as efficient and environmentally friendly as we can.
Thank you. Trustee McMahon, you're having a printing process named after you. Congratulations.
Do I get a royalty per page printed?
I think it's going to go to ASA for approval, but I'm sure they will. Other questions of David Demers? Seeing none, thank you very much. So we've got a couple of agenda items left. They are in the nature of reports. And I know people have other commitments and we're already over time here. Is there any reason or any objection to delaying those last 3 items, the capital project status, the annual report on gifts, or the sole source procurement report until the next meeting? Any reason we need to hear them today? With apologies to Carolyn McDonough and Darla Reynolds and Gretchen Catlin.
Trustee Cates, I believe the intention was not to have the last 2 items as a report anyways, just to have people available for questions if there were any.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay. So we'll put those off, and if folks have questions, they can either save them to the next meeting or get them to you directly. Anything else to come before the group this afternoon? And we'll see everybody again, most everybody at the board meeting. Dean Softly, anything interesting happening in Portland today?
Gosh, I can hardly think of a single thing. And I am watching the weather very carefully. There are some lovely atmospheric snowflakes that are going to go away, and the temperature is rising. So there might be a little rain, but everyone is welcome in Portland at 300 4th Street at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Anything further this afternoon? Seeing none, I will just declare this meeting adjourned and see you all soon, and some of us at 4 o'clock today. So